I won't go, if you really want to hear my whole story, you're going to have to buy my book, which I wrote just 2 years ago, incidentally. Finally, my grandchildren and my children and my great-grandchildren, all of them, they told me I had to write a book, so I finally did it. But if you would talk about that later. Let's see, the Memphis Belle gotten an awful lot of publicity. I can't imagine up here 60 years from the time that I flew the 25th mission over Europe that we'd ever be talking to people like you. It's nice of you to come, and I appreciate it. Let me tell you how this all arrived, though, in a quick capsule. In 1940, I was
maybe this will work without the car. Try it.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That any help? It's not any help. No. My wife says I always talk too loud anyway, so we'll see. In 1940, I was at the University of Pennsylvania, Wharton School of Finance, and I was a pretty good history student also. I knew that the United States, in my opinion, was going to be in this war. Where did Bob Morgan want to be? I couldn't swim very well. They kind of left the Navy out. And crawling on the ground didn't sound like a great idea. That kind of left me only one place, up in the sky. I'd only been in an airplane one time, a DC-3 from Philadelphia to Washington, that my dad gave me for a birthday present. I wasn't over thrilled with the airplane ride. Matter of fact, I've had many of Coney Island's famous rides. It was a lot more interesting than that airplane ride. But I said, look, I'll take a try at it. I passed the physical, and in March of 1941, I was called up to start cadet training in Camden, South Carolina. 3 months at Camden, South Carolina, 3 months at Augusta, Georgia, 3 months at Barksdale Field, Shreveport, Louisiana, and 5 days after Pearl Harbor, I got my wings and my second lieutenant bars. I thought about that time I was the hottest pilot in the world. How did I get into bombers? Well, when we finished the basic training at Augusta, Georgia, they then gave you your choice. You could either become a fighter pilot or a bomber pilot. I chose bomber pilots, much to the surprise of all my friends in my hometown, Asheville, North Carolina. They said that crazy Morgan, who used to drive his dad's Buick Century around these mountains at 100 miles an hour, has to be a fighter pilot. He just can't be a bomber pilot. Well, I had 2 reasons for picking bomber pilot. One, which was the most important one, in training we made a lot of cross-country trips and around different cities and different places and then back to the base. I found that if there wasn't a good railroad track or a highway, I couldn't find my way back to the base. And I heard that bomber crews had a navigator. That settled it for me. As long as he could tell me to get there and back, how to get there, that is fine. The second reason wasn't near as important. I felt that, you know, it'd be more fun to have other people up there with you, not all by yourself. So that's how I ended up at Shreveport, Louisiana, which was a bomber training school. And as I said, I graduated 5 days after Pearl Harbor and was ready to fight anybody. We didn't know where we were going to go. We didn't know whether we'd go to the Pacific or the England. They then sent me to MacDill Field, Tampa, Florida. And I first saw my first real small bomber, which was called the Lockheed Hudson, twin-engine bomber. And we were given the job of patrolling the Gulf of Mexico. Everybody thought there'd be submarines coming into the Gulf of Mexico, and we were looking. We never saw one, but we just kept on patrolling. And this was the first time I got in trouble in the military. One Sunday afternoon, we were flying around, a beautiful day, not a cloud in the sky, and it was dull as heck, looking for submarines up and down the coast. I saw a big group of people down at St. Petersburg Beach having some sort of party. I thought I'd get down and take a close look at them. And I went down about 400 feet above the party, and boy, they were having a good time, waving to me and all that. So I came back and about 200 feet all around. Made a couple more passes and thought that was fine. The next morning I went into the office, and my operations officer said, the Major Smeltzer would like to see you at his office. That's my squadron commander. I went in and he said, Morgan, General Olds would like to see you in his office. I had never met the general. Matter of fact, I had never met any general. But I walked in and he was a real serious looking man. He didn't smile a bit at me. And he said, Morgan, were you flying Lockheed Hudson number so-and-so yesterday afternoon? Yes, sir. And did you buzz a cocktail party that I was at on the beach? I said, if you say so, sir, I guess I will. He said, well, I'll tell you one thing, Morgan, I ought to kick you out of the Air Corps right now, but I understand you're a pretty good pilot, and we need pilots badly. But I said, I'll tell you one thing. If I have my way, you'll be the oldest second lieutenant in the Army Air Corps. And he nearly made that true. Anyway, they then brought in the B-24, the Liberator, and I had never seen an airplane as big as that and ugly as that was. But, you know, gee whiz, 4-engine bomber and all that. So I trained and had 60 hours in the 24 at MacDill Field. Had orders cut to send Bob Morgan and his crew to Africa to combat. 2 days before we were supposed to leave.
Dear darling husband, you need to speak louder because I can't hear you back here.
That's my wife. 2 days before we were supposed to leave for Africa, they changed the orders. They moved us pilots out, put the co-pilots in the pilot seat, gave them new co-pilots, sent them to Africa, left us at MacDill Field. 2 weeks later, I saw the prettiest airplane I've seen then, since, and now. The Flying Fortress, the B-17. Now, if you people have ever had a chance to see a B-24 sitting next to a B-17, you get the message. And the Collins Foundation in Massachusetts has just that complex, and sometimes they come down to Florida. So if you ever see, but then you tell me which one looks like it's going to fly. The Liberator, they called it a boxcar because it looks shaped like a boxcar. It didn't look like it would get off the ground. The 17 looks like it wants to fly by itself, and nearly does. So we tried training in B-17s. My crew was formed in MacDill Field, and we went cross-country flights and simulated bomb runs and simulated target practice and all that. And we did on cross-country flights, you were allowed to go anywhere you wanted to in the United States, but you were not allowed to land anywhere but MacDill Field, so you had to come back. Well, one day I decided that I'd go up over Asheville, North Carolina, and let the people see a B-17 from the air, because they knew they'd never seen a B-17. So I flew legitimately. I was 2,000 feet above the field and all that. And we had a little airport there. And I don't know, the devil got a hold of me again. And I landed. But I made a bad mistake. I burnt out my brakes to landing. So I had to call up my squadron commander and tell him about it. And after he said a few choice words, he said, we'll send a crew up, get the brakes fixed, come on back. They did. Went back to the MacDill. He never said a word to me about that incident at all, which I expected him to say. Anyway, 2 weeks after that, we were ordered to Walla Walla, Washington. Why they were going to send us to the West Coast, but we knew we were going to England. But anyway, we went to Walla Walla, and when I went into this operations office to see what airplane I was flying to Walla Walla, my name wasn't on the board. Everybody had their name on the airplane, their number. So I asked the operations officer what airplane I was flying. He said, well, you better go see the Major Smeltzer because he'll tell you. I went in the Major Smeltzer's office and I said, Major, what airplane am I flying to Walla Walla? He said, Morgan, you remember that little incident of you landing at Asheville, North Carolina? Yes, sir. He said, well, you're not flying an airplane to Walla Walla, you're riding a troop train. So I rode the troop train from MacDill all the way to Walla Walla. I had a good time. I got to ride up in the cab and we shot dice and played cards and all that sort of thing. Walla Walla, we were there in the summer of 1942. And nothing really happened there except normal training, except one incident. My flight surgeon of our 91st Bomb Group's wife came out to visit him in Walla Walla, and she was from Memphis, Tennessee. And she brought her sister with her, Margaret Pope. And Bob Morgan started dating Margaret Pope. And we got along very well there. Then we were ordered to go to Bangor, Maine, which would be our kickoff spot for going to Europe. And got brand new airplanes. We all went to Bangor and made test flights to be sure everything was working properly and all that. And everybody started naming their airplane. And I got the crew together. I said, guys, everybody's naming their airplanes, painting images on that side of the airplane. We need to do something. 10 guys, 10 different ideas. I kind of weakly said, you know, what about the name Memphis Belle? Oh, no, that won't work. I said, well, sleep on it tonight. Tomorrow we'll talk it over again. Maybe we can come up with something. That night I took my tail gunner, Johnny Quinlan, out to a beer joint. And when we got there, I mentioned to Johnny, I said, what do you think about the name Memphis Belle? They call me Chief. Johnny said, no, Chief. He said, I don't think that would work. Well, to make a long story short, we had a few more beers. And before we left, he changed his mind. So the next day we got together, we had 2 votes for the Memphis Belle and 8 other names. So, they still didn't think it was a good idea, the rest of them, but years later they thought it was great. Anyway, so I called up a man named Petty who used to paint for Esquire magazine in those days, beautiful girls, asking for a painting. He sent me a painting, and we had a good artist in our group, 91st group. He painted it on the airplane. The only question he ever asked me was, he said, do you care what color bathing suit I put on her? I said, as long as you put a bathing suit on her, it's all right. So that's why the airplane has a blue bathing suit on one side and a red bathing suit on the other side. Anyway, we, in August of 1942, we were ordered to go to England. And we went the northern route that Paul talked about, going to Newfoundland and over to Scotland and then to England. We got there and the British were building bases just as fast as they could. This was late August, 1st September of 42. Now Paul and his group had already run one mission. That he led the first mission over Europe in August of 42. Paul did tell you that the one thing, we didn't know what the heck we were doing. The generals didn't know what we were doing. Nobody read a book about this daylight strategic bombing. Nobody knew what kind of formations to fly. We did. Everything was going to be trial and error. But since it was so important to the Americans to do this daylight flying combat successfully, because the British said you can't do it, we had to prove it. Well, there were times there in the very beginning that we didn't think we could do it. I mean, it was really bad. To give you a good example, we ran our first mission, which was the second mission because Paul ran the first one. We ran our first mission in early November of 1942, and first mission was easy. The easiest mission I had in the 25 missions. The fighters stayed out of range. Flak wasn't very accurate. We didn't lose an airplane that day. And that night, I remember talking at the bar when we got back to the officers' club. Gee whiz, if this is the way this war is going, we will have this over in no time. We went to St. Nazaire submarine pens the next mission and lost 3 airplanes out of our squadron. From then on, we knew what we were up against, because the German fighters, the Focke-Wulf 190 and the Messerschmitt 109, were great, great airplanes, and their pilots, Hitler put his best pilots in those airplanes against us, because he said the Americans will never bomb Germany in daylight. Well, we were going to prove him wrong, but it was going to be costly. In the first 3 months, the 91st Bomb Group, who had 36 airplanes when we went across the North Atlantic to England, we lost 82% of those airplanes. So that's when the generals came up with the saying, if anybody finishes 25 missions, they can go home. Of course, we didn't know whether we would or not. Well, during the 25 missions, about halfway through, we had a guy show up by the name of William Wyler, Major William Wyler of the Army Air Corps Film Unit. He was a great director. At that time, his most famous movie was Mrs. Miniver. And he came looking around, and he came by our airplane, and he saw we'd been on 12 missions already, and we were still around. He asked me, he said, Morgan, could I fly with you guys and make some filming? Well, I was very hesitant, because to have 11th man running around that airplane, getting in the way of the gunners and the rest of us, I said, well, Bill, we'll try it. If it doesn't work, we'll have to stop it. He was an amazing man. You could all have seen him running around that airplane with the oxygen bottle in one hand and the camera in the other. And he was all over that place. And he didn't get in anybody's way. So he flew 5 combat missions on the Memphis Belle. And also he had other cameramen on other airplanes also shooting. As a matter of fact, one of them got shot down. But making this film, and before he finished, we didn't know what he was going to do with this film. He didn't know what he was going to do with it. He was just told to film daylight strategic bombing. And he was doing a good job of it. Just to show you, I was a flight leader. That meant that I had wingmen, one man on the right, one man on the other. We tried to box formation, 4th man. That didn't work. But anyway, I had men fly a wing, because the formation, tight formation, was the most important thing against the fighter. Very important. So important that my wingmen, at many times, they would overlap the tip of my wing. That's how close we were. But the firepower they could put out with all those guns for the formation was good. But as I told you, the losses were extremely high. I was the only flight leader that was still a 2nd lieutenant. All the other flight leaders were captains. But rank didn't make any difference over there. Combat's combat. It would make any difference what rank you were. But during that 25 missions, I had 8 engines shot out. I had 6 feet of the right wing knocked off, 4.5 feet of the left wing knocked off, and 7 feet of the tail stabilizer shot off, not all in one mission. And hundreds of flak holes and bullet holes in the airplane. And only one man, very slightly injured, Johnny Quinlan, the tail gunner, got a little piece of flak, hit him just above the knee. I could have taken a needle and made a worse mark in that piece of flak. He had to take the Purple Heart. They made him. Anyway, so what I'm trying to get at, I lost my right wing man twice. My right wing man got shot down twice. My left wing man got shot down once. And we came home. Why? Don't ask me. It wasn't anything that we did. It was any more skillfully than my wingmen. We just happened to be in the right place at the right time, and they were in the wrong place. And that's the way it was. And I still haven't figured it out, why I lost those men and we came back. Because, again, it was nothing that we did skillfully. Anyway, it's obvious we finished 25 missions. And, I forgot to tell you that on the 16th mission, my squadron commander got shot down, Major Smelter, over St. Nazaire. And when they went through his desk drawer, they found 2 promotion slips, one to first lieutenant and one to captain. So in 2 weeks, I got promoted twice. When we landed in the 25th mission of May 17th, 1943, William Wyler came up to me and he said, "Morgan, I got news for you." I said, "What?" He said, "This filming we've been doing, it's going to be a documentary." I said, "Yeah, and we're going to call it the Memphis Belle." I said, "So what? We're going home. That's what counts." And then I thought, yeah, well, turned around and said, "Bill, what would have happened if we got shut down on the 25th mission?" He said, "Oh, we had a backup." There was another airplane and another group that the airplane had finished 25 missions, not all the crew. And he said, I said, well, who was the backup? He said it was named Hell's Angels. So the Hell's Angels captain might have been standing up here talking to you instead of me. Anyway, then the generals got a great bait idea. They said, "We're not only going to let you guys go home, but we're going to send the airplane home too." You can imagine taking a B-17 out of combat as much as they needed it. But anyway, and then they said, "We're going to put you on a public relations tour around the United States and thank the American public, the civilians, of what they're doing at home so that we can win the war in combat." So we flew back across the North Atlantic, and our first stop was Washington, D.C., and I have to tell you about that one because General Arnold was going to meet us, and some of Roosevelt's group was going to meet us. And I called in for landing instructions at Washington National, and they gave it to me. And the tower operator said, "But before you land, General Arnold is ordering you to buzz the field." I said, "Would you repeat that, please?" He didn't know who he was talking to. So if any of you remember the old Washington National Airport, they had and that building is still there. They built around it. It's still there. It had a balcony, and people could get out there and watch airplanes come in and take off and all that. That's where the general and all the dignitaries were, and I headed right for them. After I landed, General Arnold came over and congratulated us for getting through 25 missions and coming home. And then he leaned over to me and whispered in my ear. He said, "Morgan, that was one hell of a buzz job." He told me one other thing. He said, "While you're flying around the United States the next 3 months, visiting all these cities, you can buzz anywhere you want to." I had a good time for 3 months. And if you ever get down to Asheville, North Carolina, my hometown, they get them to point you out the City Hall and the courthouse down there. They're pretty close together. And Asheville was one of our stops on the 31 city tour. And when I got ready to leave town, I thought, well, I'll drive up over town, give them a little wave and tell them goodbye. We're going to Columbus, Ohio, next stop. And I came up the main street, which is called Patton Avenue, and I just saw the City Hall and the courthouse sitting there. And I said, with a 60-degree bank, I can get through there. I did, and they still talk about it, actually. As a matter of fact, an artist did a painting on it last year, so it put it down on black and white. But it was kind of amazing because there was a lieutenant colonel in the City Hall. They had a weather wing down there at that time. And he heard me go through. He rushed out to see what happened. Everybody said, he said, "Who was that?" I said, "That's that Morgan, Memphis Belle." He got on the phone and called the Pentagon. Reported me. And they told him, forget it. General Arnold had told the crew while we were in Washington that you guys can pretty well name whatever you want to do for the rest of the war. and my crew had different ideas. Some of them wanted to go to pilot school, and some of the guys, the enlisted men, wanted to go to officers' candidate school. And I didn't know, Rick, what I wanted to do, but I knew one thing. I didn't want to sit in the Pentagon the rest of the war. And I didn't want to go in the training command, because that's more dangerous than combat. And to be honest, I knew where these B-29s. They didn't build this bomber for just to take it to Europe. It was going to naturally go to the Pacific. And I had a little payback for Pearl Harbor I wanted to take care of. And that's the reason I asked for B-29 Squadron, which General Wolf gave me. And in October of 1944, I took my squadron and flew to the island of Saipan in the Pacific. And General Rosie O'Donnell, who was the commanding general of the 73rd Wing, which my squadron and group was under, called me on the phone on the 23rd of November, said, "Morgan, tomorrow we're going to bomb Tokyo. This is going to be our first raid." He said, "I'd like to have you lead it, and I'll go along as command pilot." I said, "I appreciate the honor, General. Why did you pick me?" He said, "Well," he said, "you got through 25 in Europe. I figure you could get through another one." So on the 24th of November, we flew that long mission. It's 7.5 hours to Japan and 7.5 hours back, nearly a 15-hour trip, and bombed Tokyo. Very little opposition. We lost one airplane that day from a kamikaze attack, and that was all that we lost on that time. So I went along, and my squadron I flew 26 missions over Japan, and General Donald called me up again and said, "Morgan, don't you think your luck might run out one of these days?" I said, "I'm ready to go home." He said, "Fine." So he said, "You go on home." The only other thing I want to mention about the Pacific, two things. One is, in the first few months, we did a lousy bombing job. We were bombing from 30 to 31,000 feet, and they had 200-mile-an-hour jet winds up there. The poor bombardier, even with the northern bomb sight, had a terrible time being accurate. And Washington was very unhappy with our bombing. So they decided to make a big change, and so they relieved the commanding general of the 20th Bomber Command and sent General Curtis LeMay in to take over. When I heard General LeMay was coming, I told my squadron, I said, "You're going to see some changes here somewhere, I guarantee you, because he's not going to put up with this lousy bombing." And the first briefing that in March 6th, he came and briefed us on the mission. He said, "We're going to do a number of things different. We're going to bomb at night. We've been doing mainly daylight bombing." He said, "We're going to carry a incendiary bomb, fire bomb, jelly bomb, whatever you want to call it, which will burn on anything, and we'll burn up Japan. And more important, we're not going up to 31,000 feet to do it. The highest group will be at 7,500 feet. Well, you could have heard a pin drop in that room." And the general, I remember very distinctly, he had the cigar in his mouth, never lit it, but he said, very seriously, he said, "I asked General Arnold to let me lead this mission, but he refused." And a pilot in the back room got up and said, "Sir, you can have my place right now." And that brought laughter down. We went over to Tokyo that night, and no opposition hardly. The anti-aircraft fire was bursting way up high. The fighters, night fighters, were not much good anyway at that point as far as damage. So we really, and for the next 6 days, we hit Tokyo and the Tokyo area and burnt out 54 square miles around Tokyo. And then they wouldn't give up. No wonder Paul had to drop the atomic bomb. The only other thing about the Pacific was the island of Iwo Jima, and I have to mention it because it's so important to me and a lot of others. The Marines took the island of Iwo Jima, and you know, at a very, very great cost of lives. But it certainly paid off as far as the B-29 was concerned, because it was much closer to Japan, and if you had problems rather than ditching the ocean, you could land at Iwo Jima and get help. It saved me and many, many others. I lost 2 engines over Tokyo one night and couldn't get back to Saipan. If Iwo Jima hadn't been there, I would have been in the Pacific Ocean. But I landed at Iwo, and they changed the engine in a few days, went on back to Saipan. But over the course of the B-29 program in the Pacific, 1,600 B-29s landed at Iwo Jima, or they would have been in the Pacific Ocean. So, again, thank the Marines for over and over and over again. In middle of May of 1945, General O'Donnell called me up and said, "Don't you think you ought to go home?" I said, "Yes, sir, I'm ready." Sent me back to the States. I went to Savannah, Georgia, trained in B-29 crews, and then Paul and them did their job and the war was over. I stayed in the reserves until 1965. I still fly, and the Air Force has been awful good to me. They've let me fly the B-52. Recently, they let me fly the B-1. And you talk about a thrill. I got an hour and a half in the left seat of that airplane, and I'll tell you what, it's a fighter, not a bomber. But it's such a marvelous airplane, and the guys have done a great job with it in the Iraq War and all that. But I came back and settled into Nashville. As I say, I still fly and will keep flying as long as I can pass the physical for the FAA. You will see out here at the air show the B-17 painted up exactly like the original Memphis Belle. The original Memphis Belle is in Memphis, Tennessee on display. The one out here is the one they used to make the movie with, but it's painted up exactly like it, everything. You can go through it, see what a great airplane it is. There's 13 B-17s still flying around the country, and I've flown 10 of the 13. And I flew this one a few weeks ago. That's the story of Bob Morgan. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Jackie Williams, and we hope you enjoyed the presentation of the lecture by General Tibbets and Colonel Morgan. We thought you would enjoy getting to know Colonel Morgan a little more personally, so we came out to the air show, and we're going to join Colonel Morgan aboard the replica of the Memphis Belle. So join me now. Let's go aboard the Memphis Belle, and we'll take you back in time to 1943. We're here in the cockpit of the Memphis Belle, and joining us is Colonel Robert Morgan. Colonel, we want to thank you very much for being with us this morning, and in addition, we want to say it's a real honor for us to have you on one of our programs. Thanks very much for joining us here in your cockpit.
I appreciate that, but I'm very happy to do it. I'm always happy when I'm sitting in the B-17.
You said that this is a beautiful airplane. Tell us why it's such a beautiful airplane.
Well, it's beautiful from the standpoint of looks, but it's also beautiful from the standpoint that this airplane is shown in combat that it can take tremendous amount of punishment by the enemy and still fly. And it is also an airplane that's fun to fly when they're not shooting at you.
Now, as we were talking out on the tarmac, you were telling me that you had quite a few engines shot out of this airplane in your 25 missions.
Yeah, during the 25 missions, I had 8 engines shot out that had to be replaced one at a time. I lost 2 engines on one mission, but only usually just lost 1 engine at a time.
And also, we talked a little bit about the markings on the plane. At each window, there is a person's name. And tell us about that. That didn't happen until you actually came back to the United States.
Well, Actually, it happened in England when we got ready to come back to the United States. After we'd finished 25 missions, they knew we were taking the airplane home on a public relations tour, so everybody started having their name put in their particular position. All 10 of us had our names put on there, and even some places the wives or girlfriend's name happened to get on the airplane too.
I noticed that on the back there was a sergeant who had his name on it, and underneath was Virginia. Was that his wife or?
I think that was his wife's name, yeah, if I remember correctly.
How did the tradition of painting logos on your airplanes and doing stuff like that, how did that start?
Well, it started way back, even before we got into the conflict of World War II. People started putting paintings on the airplane, and it just came. It was kind of a relaxation thing to have, and that airplane was identified not just by a number, but by the girl or man or woman or whoever you put on there. And it'd been going on even when I got in conflict, and everybody at our base was starting to put their name on it or their girl's picture, and so we painted the Memphis Belle on.
And earlier in the program at the Elliott, you told the story of how it got to be the Memphis Belle. I thought that was a great story.
Yeah, well, the rest of the crew members finally gave in to me, and we named it the Memphis Belle, and because I was dating a girl from Memphis.
Colonel, there are some other markings on the plane outside as well. There are some bombs and there are some SWAT stickers. Tell our viewers what those things mean.
Well, the bombs, there's 25 bombs painted on the side of the airplane. That's one bomb for each mission, so there would naturally be 25. And above the bombs, they had some stars above some of the bombs. A red star meant that we led the whole 8th Bomber Command, and the other stars, we led our 91st Bomb Group, and those stars, we just were one other airplane in the formation.
Now, you had 10 guys that flew in this plane with you. You had a pilot, a co-pilot, a navigator. What other positions did you have?
Well, you had the navigator, bombardier, and then you had 2 waist gunners, one on each side of the airplane. You had the top turret gunner who stood right behind the pilot and co-pilot. You had the radio operator who was halfway back towards the back end of the airplane. You had the ball turret gunner who was positioned below the airplane. And then you had the tail gunner all the way in the back and the end of the airplane.
And the guys who flew with you, are you still in touch with any of them?
Well, there's only 3 of us still alive, but we've kept in touch all through the years and gotten together at reunions and in Memphis, it's many of them, and many other places. But we all have always kept in touch with each other.
And, you know, another thing is you were 10 guys who were probably from all over the United States. You didn't know each other when you started, but you stayed together as a group through all of those 25 missions. Did that kind of create a bond for you guys?
There was no question about there was a bond among our 10 guys. And it didn't stop with just the war was over, because we kept it close, and we were all very close to each other, and that's why we kept in contact with each other. And my co-pilot, I'll have to admit, he and I were even closer than any of us, because after the war, he and I were in furniture business together, and we played golf together. We were business partners, and we fished and hunted and did everything together, and he died just early this year.
And you know, I should ask you, and I hate to because this is a hard question for any interviewer, how old are you, Colonel?
I'm 85.
Okay, and you still fly, right?
Oh yeah, as long as I can pass my physical, I'll keep flying.
And you have flown this plane even though it is a replica of the Memphis Belle.
Oh, yeah, I've flown this plane a number of times. I flew it when they were making the movie. I also flew it a couple of weeks ago at Scott Air Force Base. Just when I can get a chance and they're going to fly, and I happen to be there, why they let me fly.
That's great. I'd like to fly with you someday. I'd feel safe with you, Colonel.
Thank you. Thank you.
You know, now let's talk about the 25 missions. You told me earlier that you were very lucky. and I'm sure that that's true. But I think there's also a human component here as well. Was there something about the makeup of your crew that you guys worked well as a team?
I think that was true, but that was true with most bomber crews. They worked very, very close together. We had a little knack about ourselves, though. You know, our losses were so high that you never knew whether you were going to come back or not when you went out on a mission. But before we climbed in the airplane to go on a mission, we got around like a team and got huddled in a football game. And we said, look, guys, if only one airplane comes back today, it's going to be us. We thought positive, and we tried to keep that positive attitude all the time because it helped you do your job. And you had to feel positive. If you got negative, you were going to let down on your job and not get it done properly. So we think that helped us. And luck, I use the word luck, good fortune. I've always said that for some reason the good Lord brought us back, and when we lost so many guys that were close to us. Maybe because it gave us an opportunity to meet you. That's kind of special for us. Thank you. Let's talk a little bit about your special talent as a pilot, and that was to buzz airfields. Well, you wouldn't call that a talent because anybody can do a buzz job, but of course normally it's against regulations, and particularly today you'd never think of doing anything like that. It is done occasionally, but FAA is all over you if you do anything like that. And during wartime it was a little bit different. You had a little more freedom to do what you wanted to do as long as you didn't kill anybody. And I kind of was a daredevil in that sort of thing and enjoyed doing it and got away with it. You got away with it a lot. Now, before we close here, what I'd like you to do, if you and I were flying this plane and I were your co-pilot and we were going to come in to land, exactly what would we do if we wanted to buzz this airport? How about you kind of talk me through a buzz here? Well, and today there is such a thing as a legal buzz at air shows. They allow legal buzzing, but you have to get permission from the tower and the FAA to do all that. And you don't do it you do it planned that you're going to do a buzz job, and there still is something to do. But back in those days, half the time I buzzed places, I didn't even tell the co-pilot I was going to do it. And some places, after the war, we went back to those spots that I buzzed, particularly in my hometown in Asheville, North Carolina. And he said, we really did that, didn't we? And you didn't even tell me about it before you did it. And he could shake his head, said we must have been crazy. I said, I was crazy. It was crazy. Well, now what would we do? How would we do it if you and I were in this plane? You just line up where you're going to buzz. If you're going to buzz an airport, you come down the runway and do the heading on the runway, and just keep pushing the nose down until you got to where you felt that might be 100 feet, might be 200 feet, depending on the area and the target you were buzzing. And just you didn't do anything else but just trim your airplane so it would fly. Of course, you had your hands on the yoke here, so it didn't get away from you. And if you wanted to pull up real fast, you could pull up real fast. And you just kept pushing it down until you got it down to the level, and then you leveled off at that altitude, and then pull a beautiful steep climb out of it. I think just from you describing it, I can tell you like to do that a lot. Colonel, we really want to thank you for letting us be part of your history and letting us come aboard the Memphis Belle. It's a real treat. Thank you. That's my pleasure. Now, what's next on your agenda? Well, this is about the end of our air show year. It ends usually in November. We don't have any more actual shows. Got a couple of speaking engagements, but not shows. And it doesn't start up again until March. That's just a normal cycle of most of the show business. Florida has a few extra shows, but I don't come. This is the main show I come to in Florida because I've enjoyed this show. Last year was great. looks like it's going to be a greater one this year.
Yeah, this is a great air show. When you're not at air shows, what do you do?
I'm in the real estate business, real estate broker.
Okay. Well, Colonel, thanks again. We really appreciate it. And for all of our viewers, let me shake your hand and say thank you for what you did during World War II. We at MCTV hope that you enjoyed meeting Colonel Morgan up close and personal. This is Jackie Williams for MCTV. We are keeping you connected.